This video is about the Exodus, what is true and what is not true about the Exodus. So it's basically there was an Exodus, but it didn't happen like in the descriptions that you find in like accurate. It didn't accurately happen in the same way that is described in the book Exodus. Like um, there is evidence that the Israelites, like the Hebrews or Israelites, were in Egypt. Okay, and there is evidence that later they were in Canaan. In modern day Israel. So it's like they were here and then there. So there must have been like an exodus, like around those times. Like there is evidence that is, if you look at it objectively, is very hard to not accept that they lived in a place called Avaris, and around the place called Avaris lived a population that very much fit the description of Israel. Okay, I'll read, for example, some stuff about this from ChatGPT that I ask, like some reasons, like why they it's like thought. Then there was in Avaris a large Semitic population. Excavations directed by Egyptologist Manfred Bietek uncovered a major settlement whose architecture, poetry, and costumes are characteristic of people from Canaan and Syria rather than native Egyptians. They had Canaanite style homes. Okay, their homes fitted like not didn't fit Egypt but Canaan, how they built their homes. They had donkey burials that the Egyptians didn't have. They had names. This I saw in some videos. They had names that you actually see also later in the Old Testament. They found in Egypt there like all kind of people with names that that are like Hebrew names. And also the Egyptians call them in some of the writings, Egyptian writings about this. They calling something like Habaru or something like that. They call them something sounds very similar to Hebrew. And Avaris is also similar to how in Hebrew you say someone is Hebrew, you say Ivri, so it's like Ivri and Avaris, and Habaru is like it sounds like it's those people. And they had all kind of names that I don't have now the names, but you can search it. They had all kind of Hebrew sounding names. And the around the time that they were supposed to go to Exodus, that it was in the time of Ramses II, then it's like the population of Avaris declined a lot in people of not Egyptian ancestry, of like of Semitic ancestry. Like it didn't disappear necessarily at once, but all the place, but it declined. Okay, and then around the same time in Israel, then there is like suddenly appear like new settlements with distinct features of like the people that are identified as Israel in the Bible. Like for example, there was no pigs found there, unlike in the settlements of other people. There was no pigs. I will look in another article and tell you about this. Like it's a bit later in the same page. Just a moment. Um, okay, never mind. I won't waste your time. But basically, there was evidence that, like, among other things, that there was no pigs, and there was all kind of specific traits that fit that are consistent later of this specific group of people called Israel. Is like they appear in the around the year like 1200 BC, probably earlier, but at some point around that they before the year 1200 BC, at some point in like in the 13th century BC, they appear at some point in Israel, like the same time that they stop kind of they seem to disappear in Israel. The people like disappear in Israel. Yeah. So that heavily indicates that it's like this. It you can't like 100% prove this for sure, but it looks very much like it was those people in Egypt, and then those people like also in Egypt there was. Never mind. Anyway, it looks like the if you look at it, you can look into all the details, but in the end of the day, it looks very much like there was people fitting the description of Israel in this around the Avaris in Egypt, and then at the same time, they kind of the population declined there. We don't know if it really happened in one event or it was gradual over some decades or something, but they disappear in Egypt and then they appear in Israel. Yeah. So that tells you that at least in the Exodus story is at least real in the sense that there was a group of people. That those people, there is also evidence that they came to Egypt, like they're they had in Egypt like traits of Canaan people, so they were like that means they first came to Egypt and then like it's described and they were there for like a lot of time. It's known that they were there for some hundreds of years, and then they kind of either totally or mostly disappear relative around the 13th over the 13th century at some point. And then like it could be maybe some people stayed or something, but anyway they generally kind of decline a lot in population there and appear some people like this in Israel. So at least in that sense, the story is true. But it's probably it seems that it's not true. On the other hand, in the sense of some of the more like not all, but some of the more fantastical details are probably not historically accurate, but are like you need to take into account that Exodus is after Genesis, okay? So you see in Genesis all the descriptions are like they are like it's things that God is saying and he makes some it has it's all very meaningful theologically and in the sense of like morally, and it does speak about actual history of the universe since the beginning of the universe until like some thousands of years ago. But you also see on the other hand that it's very figurative, that there is no like historical evidence that it literally happened the way that it's described. So Exodus is only one book after that, and up till the end of of the scriptures, like up till the Gospels and Acts of the Apostles, basically, then it's like still a lot of things are, if we're being honest, are sound very not literal, like sounds figurative, but it's like it's even more the more you go back. Like in Genesis, all the book pretty much sounds like not literal history, but like inspired mythology or parables about the history of humanity and the universe and stuff like this. And then like Exodus is right after that. So it only makes sense. It won't immediately transition from things like, you have like God creating the world in 7 days, the universe and and everything in 7 days. I mean, he can do that, but it doesn't fit. It's not historically accurate that all these things appear within 7 days, and all the ages. If you connect the ages of the people, it results in the world being 5,000 years for example. And the world is not really 5,000 years old, right? So, and some other thing, and there wasn't a flood that flooded the whole world, and many other details. Like you have some descendants of like Abraham, and I think of maybe some other people that, like, each one of them becomes a nation. Like there was this guy that went there, and he's like as if all those people in all that part of the world is like as if descendant of that guy, or that is like descendant of like someone of like a few thousand years ago. Kind of that doesn't really make sense literally, right? So this is like so I think also in the context of the Exodus, it only makes sense to think that it's not meant to be read as literal history, but more like as some kind of combination of historical events and some kind of fantasizing that is more like mythological and fictional, that is to some extent connected to reality, but goes way beyond that into like more fantastical descriptions that fit into telling a very meaningful, interesting story with all kind of meaningful points to it, but not like I think the story of Noah, for example, yeah. It's very meaningful, but there wasn't a flood that flooded the world. But that doesn't mean it's not a very meaningful story that God said, and there was a lot of flooding that flooded some significant parts of the world, some after the Ice Age, and so that's probably what inspired the flood myths in all kind of places. But generally speaking, it didn't literally happen. But it is all those stories do have some points to them. So, like, um, so I think also in Exodus there wasn't any evidence found in Sinai, in the desert between the Nile Delta and in Israel. There wasn't like evidence of like 600,000 people staying there for 40 years. So apparently that didn't happen, but they did cross. There is the fact that they are here and then there means they did cross from Egypt to Israel, but the part of them being 40 years and so many people, there were probably a lot less people. They there were for sure a lot less people, and very likely they were there for a lot less time. It was very likely more of a straightforward forward crossing, and I won't be surprised if they didn't all cross at once. Um, but they did cross, and there was some miracles involved, because like I'll give you some example about this. Well, again, you can't like prove this, but um, I think the miracle with the Egyptian drowning, like with Moses crossing and the Egyptian drowning, which is one of the main events, that appeared to, I think that actually happened. But what people get wrong about this is that in like pretty much all translations, it's written that that Moses and the people crossed the Red Sea. But the original text doesn't say that. The original text said he crossed Yam Suf. It's what it's called in Hebrew. The word Yam is like really doesn't have to mean sea. It's like the Sea of Galilee, for example, where Jesus did a lot of the things that he did. It's a lake, and the Dead Sea, which is also a significant place. Uh, it's also a lake. They didn't they just called the big lakes back then with the same word that they called sea. Sea, and the other word after Yam, which is Suf, means reeds. Um, and or papyrus or reeds. Now, you need to take into account that there is no reeds at all in the Red Sea. Okay, so it can't be the place is called Sea of Reeds or Reed Sea. So it can't be a place that has no reeds. Okay, because it's salty and reeds grow in fresh water, generally in lakes and swamps and stuff like that. So it can't be the Red Sea. Also, if he crossed the Red Sea, he would end up in the other side in Saudi Arabia, which also doesn't make any sense because it's written after he crossed this place. He's still in Egypt and even kind of close to the Nile Delta, which is where he started. So he almost didn't go forward at this point. So he's like, it doesn't make any sense, it just doesn't make any sense. And it's also written like that how it opened, it described that it was open because God made a strong east wind blow all night. That sounds like those waters just opened because there was unusually strong wind all night towards the direction that they were going, which is east. The Red Sea or any sea would not open because of any wind. If it was like, God can do that, but it doesn't really make any sense. People would describe it as like that there was a strong east wind and then it opened, like, because it's like, it sounds like natural kind of. It doesn't sound like, the water just open 1 mile deep and in a place that is the size of, like 200 kilometers across or something like that. And they wouldn't, and it's described that they crossed it within a few hours. And it's like, this group of people like this within a few hours would only move a few kilometers forward, So that makes no sense. Like, and then if you take into account that there was in a very logical place, like next to Avaris, where we know they lived, in the direction of Israel, like kind of between Avaris, quite close to it, towards Israel, there was back then several big lakes that were somewhat connected with water between them and with really a lot of reeds. So you can kind of get that that's what they call the sea or big lake of reeds, because that area was like 20 kilometers or 12 mile wide. So it was a big area some of it was covered with water, with some lakes and some marshes and some earth and something like that, and a lot of reeds. So that really makes sense, that they were talking about that. And but that place now doesn't exist anymore because the Egyptians, they built the Suez Canal there, so they drained it and they did some earthworks, and like they so it doesn't exist yet, but it exists for thousands of years, called the Bala Lakes. And then like, so those lakes were they had a very unusual thing about them, that they fitted very well to being naturally like split in the middle, so people could cross because they were quite big. They were like some, each one of them was like some 8 kilometers long or something like that, and like some kilometers wide and some kilometers long, but only a few meters deep, um, which is unusual. It's like 1,000 times longer and wider than how much deep it is. Even more than, I think, at least 1,000 times, which is, it is unusual. Yeah, and there is like effect that can happen if there is a very strong wind over some body of water over some time. Like if there is a hurricane, for example, you know this in the US well because you have hurricanes there. You have like when the hurricane comes, it's like it lifts the water. It's called storm surge. You know, the water go up like when it comes, and when it leaves, the water level goes down also. Like it goes above the normal level and then it goes under the normal level. When it leaves, it's generally a lot of times it doesn't leave through the water. Then you don't notice it because it continues into the land and disappears. But if it does come and enter both ways through the water, like the sea or the ocean, then when it leaves, if it still has strength, it also pulls the water with it, and the water in bays can go down even significantly. Can go down, and this can also happen in a lake. Um, and there was some simulation done like that and they figure out in those lakes because they were shallow. Um, like there were cases, for example, there was in Lake Erie in the US, there was pictures of this, that there was sometimes some strong, that they're also very shallow, but they're too big to open. They're like huge. They're like the size of like uh, like a country, kind of. They're like 50 times longer than those lakes were. So they're too big to really open, and they're still like several times deeper. So they wouldn't actually open, but they were cases that that the storm, it's called the wind set down, that this effect actually did open. There are some quite big areas that are normally covered in water, and people like went there. It didn't open all the huge way there because it's like 400 kilometers or 250 miles long, but it opened like it went down by some meter. It went down, like the water went down because of a storm so much that you could drown if it went up. And so this they did some simulation and they figured out in those lakes, because they were only a few meters deep, then a very strong wind, like this for some hours, like it says, the text says that there was, God made a strong wind blow all the night, and it made the waters split, and that could actually happen there, like a wind that is something like a hurricane or maybe even weaker over some hours could have made in a lake that shallow the water like stick to the far banks and open in the middle, and people would have somewhat hard time walking in such a strong wind, but it's not so strong given the fact that it was pushing them forward. They they could have actually managed. It was dangerous, but they could have actually managed to. It was, they estimated like something like 100, between 100 and 120 kilometers per hour wind would have done that effect. And then and that seems like suspiciously fitting both the location and the specific geography and the description. It seems like actually fitting to something that actually happened, and then like there's also something fitting about this, that those lakes were like kind of perfect for erasing the the Egyptians that drowned there, because they it's written like that God closed the water on them, so that part could be was like not natural, and but then it's like those lakes were there was never archaeological search to find, and there are like the remains, even though most scholars now think it was there, agree that the Red Sea is a mistranslation, and that this is one, maybe probably the most likely location where it happened if this did happen. But like they didn't search for several reasons. First of all, it's a big area, but also those lakes don't exist anymore there because the Egyptians destroyed them and moved around all the earth there and drained all the water. But also it's likely that that things that the Egyptians and their things didn't get preserved in a recognizable way there because it's been more than 3,000 years, and those lakes were like the worst thing possible for preservation. They had like more acidic water than normal, and they had a lot of bacteria that destroys things, and they were warm, and this kind of condition of warm acidic water, and they were like there was regularly like water flowing to there and out of there, flooding. They were like being flooded sometimes, and water going out and in, and so things there were like um, anything biological would have disintegrated, and most of the things that the Egyptians used was biological because they didn't have iron yet, and bronze was really expensive. Then they had some bronze, but even bronze in those conditions disintegrate into something unrecognizable after this long in these specific conditions. It affects the copper, and bronze is made of copper and tin, and the copper breaks away eventually, and like it disintegrates. And so if you take into account that like there was only like relatively small amount of like, and there was probably less people than in the story, so let's say there was some hundreds of soldiers with most of them either without or with little amount of bronze in their equipment, and this disintegrated, and it was washed away many times, and eventually, and people did some changes there, and eventually the whole place was like they did huge like earthwork, and drained all the water and built the Suez Canal there, so everything was also pushed aside here and there, and like pumped away, and so it was like if something was left, it's probably scattered now. Very little amount of material that is scattered that could be within a big area, and there was never an archaeological attempt to find it, partly because it was only in the modern times that people figure out this mistake. So there was the first search in the Red Sea, and of course they didn't find anything there because it didn't happen there. And then when like it was kind of concluded that actually it was probably not the Red Sea, it was the Sea of Reeds, and they started searching in some lakes. Those lakes didn't exist anymore. And in like the last like 70 something years, there is enmity between Israel and Egypt, which is also kind of a reason for the Egyptians not to want so much to look for it. So it's like, so for all kind of reasons, there was never even a search done, an archaeological search done. Some of the reasons because archaeologists understand that nothing would get preserved in these conditions, and they don't know where it is. And it could be in some other lakes like this, because there's several lakes that it could be in. So it's like, I think that's not a coincidence. Like it always seems intentional. Like it seems like God, he generally doesn't. He tries to act hidden, kind of. He you can see the things he does. He acts in secret, kind of. So it's like it makes sense. He would like do. This looks a lot like he did this miracle. He built like places that are very well put on the map, plus designed in a way it's very fitting to make this miracle happen, and then like make it leave it in a way that you can't prove or disprove if it did or didn't happen, especially if you take into account that the description is probably exaggerated. Like I assume there wasn't a wall of water like it says in both their sides. Like it just means that the lake opened some path to walk on, and there was probably like not a whole army after them, but just some like significant amount of Egyptians. But it looks like that actually did happen, and um, so apparently they did go to Egypt, like it says in Genesis. There is some evidence that there was some dynasty called Hyksos in Egypt. It might be might be what is talked about in Genesis in the time of Joseph, and then they, after hundreds of years, went back. There was apparently that miracle, or some version of it, some somewhat more realistic version of the miracle of like the you know of Yam Suf, kind of like that apparently happened, and but apparently the party with them being 40 years, like and I assume that the party with Moses, like getting the Ten Commandments, going up some hill or mountain and getting the Ten Commandments, like, and Moses himself, like I suppose, existed, and I believe he did get the commandments from God, and gave it to the people, and this is kind of attested by the fact that you see this group of people up till today, um, like keep these commandments. And there is a huge reason also I didn't mention of why to believe that all of this happened is because it's written, in the text that you read. Like it's a text from this time, like any other text that you have, like historical text. Like why do you believe it? Like you believe, for example, in the case of the Alexander the Great. Okay, it's actually later in history. In the time of history, there was more writing and more easy to know what happened. And still, there is a lot of the stuff about it. It's only based. There was only one account that is contemporary to the time that wrote about it, and like the details of like his battles and stuff. It's a lot of times based on like one account mostly that was actually there, and a lot of it also seems exaggerated and fantastic, but we still believe he existed and did like the things that he did. Like, then why do you believe it? It's like you kind of assume that someone would not make all of those things up, and that like a whole group of people, like why would they make up that they were in Egypt and came from Egypt, like after having a bad time there? It seems there's no motivation. It's very hard to imagine why would someone invent something like this. Like why would they say that? Like, so that by itself is like a strong reason to think that these people were like, or came from Egypt. Because why would they make it up, and some of the also the other things written, like there's some things that there is reason to doubt, because it's like they seem like something very fantastic, and the historical evidence like really don't back them up, like them like that part with them being 600,000 people in Sinai for 40 years is just, it's really, it seems too much in contradiction to what we know, to believe in that. But that doesn't mean that the whole story is not true. It just means that like the fantastical, some, it's probably there was like some truth to also to, I believe like a lot of the fantastical things there happened in some form, but it's likely that it was like then. I give you an example, kind of like there was, for example, there was the story of Goliath, yeah, of Goliath. You look in the usual text of the Bible, the Masoretic, it says that he was like 3 meters tall. Um, that's impossible. Like no one is 3 meters tall. But then, if eventually we found earlier manuscript were found where in some places, and the earlier ones say he was like only something like 2.5 meter tall. And then they found the Dead Sea Scrolls and some other really ancient stuff, like I think Syriac maybe it was or something. Um, some of the really ancient stuff like that. And there it says he was only 2 meter and 6 or 7 centimeter tall, which is the most reasonable height you can imagine for someone like this. It's like exactly the height of the person that right now is considered the strongest person in the world. Is exactly is like 2 meter and like 6 or 7 centimeter tall and heavily built, kind of. So it's like that totally makes sense. Like, and this text of Exodus is older. It's like really very old in the time of history, that in a lot of places we have no idea really what happened there. So like it's kind of reasonable to assume that all kind of numbers, after being told many times, kind of grew as it happens in other stories, like all kind of battles, like for example in the case of Alexander, as I said, that like in the way the Greeks describe his battles, like he wins in 1 against 10, kind of, and but then like in more based on like other evidence, it seems it was probably like 1 against 2 or something like that. So it's probably like also in this case, it's like probably it was like not 600,000, but like I don't know what, 20,000 people, and they didn't take 40 years. They took like 1 year or something like that. Yeah, and probably like some of the other descriptions like were like, all kind of other stuff like that. So, but that doesn't really change. It's important to remember this doesn't mean that doesn't really change something very meaningful. Like, it doesn't change like anything really theologically significant. It doesn't change morally, kind of. It's still like the same story in the sense of the meaning of the story. It's just that like we're supposed to not take it as literal history too much. We're supposed to understand that something like this kind of like this happened, but it's not like accurate historically, but it's still like we're still supposed to take out of it like the same like theological and moral conclusions, basically. Yeah. Okay.